Every morning, millions of Americans wake up and begin their day. They grab coffee on the way to work. They shop online. They buy groceries. They pay their bills. For most people, life appears normal, but hidden beneath these everyday routines is a story that few people fully understand. A story involving two of the most powerful nations on Earth. A conflict that didn't involve bombs. No soldiers marched across borders. No cities were destroyed. Yet millions of ordinary people felt its impact. This was the U.S.-China trade war. And while politicians debated strategy and economists argued over numbers, many Americans discovered something unsettling. The cost of this economic battle was quietly showing up in their own lives. This is the hidden cost of the trade war. To understand the story, we first need to understand tariffs. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on imported goods. In 2018, the United States began imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese products. The stated goal was to reduce dependence on China, protect American industries, and address concerns about trade practices. China responded with tariffs of its own. Soon, what began as a policy decision became one of the largest economic confrontations in modern history. At first glance, many Americans believed these tariffs would mainly hurt China. The logic seemed simple. If Chinese goods were taxed, Chinese companies would suffer. But global supply chains are rarely that simple. Behind every product sitting on a store shelf is a long chain of manufacturers, importers, distributors, retailers, and consumers. When costs increase at one point in the chain, those costs often travel all the way to the end. And at the end of that chain was the American consumer. Imagine walking into a store to buy a microwave, or a television, or a child's toy. Most people don't think about where these products come from. They simply look at the price tag. But many everyday products sold in the United States rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing. When tariffs increased the cost of importing these goods, businesses faced a difficult choice: absorb the higher costs and reduce profits, or pass those costs on to consumers. Many chose the second option. For individual items, the price increase might seem small, a few dollars here, a few dollars there. But when those increases affect thousands of products across an entire economy, the impact begins to add up. Families already dealing with rising expenses suddenly found that stretching a paycheck became a little harder. A little more money for electronics, a little more money for appliances, a little more money for household goods. Nothing dramatic enough to make national headlines, yet significant enough to be felt in homes across the country, like a slow leak in a tire. Difficult to notice at first, impossible to ignore over time. The trade war didn't only affect consumers. It also created challenges for thousands of small businesses. Many American companies depend on Chinese suppliers for parts, materials, or finished products. Years had been spent building these relationships. Supply chains had been carefully optimized. Then suddenly, costs changed. A business that imported products from China could find itself paying significantly more than before. For large corporations, absorbing these costs was difficult. For small businesses, it could be devastating. Some companies raised prices. Others reduced inventory. Some delayed expansion plans. And some faced a painful reality: they could no longer compete effectively. While trade policy discussions often focus on national statistics, behind those numbers were real people: store owners, warehouse workers, entrepreneurs, employees, people whose livelihoods depended on stable business conditions. For them, uncertainty became a daily challenge. Then came the counterattack. China responded to U.S. tariffs with tariffs of its own, and one of the primary targets was American agriculture. For decades, China had been a major buyer of American farm products, particularly soybeans. Many farmers depended heavily on this international market. When Chinese tariffs reduced demand for American agricultural exports, many farmers suddenly found themselves facing a new reality: lower sales, lower prices, greater uncertainty. Some farms struggled to maintain profitability. Others relied on government support programs designed to offset losses. For farming communities, the consequences extended beyond individual businesses. Agriculture supports local economies. equipment dealers, transportation companies, processing facilities, restaurants. Entire communities can feel the impact when farmers face financial pressure. For many farming families, the trade war wasn't an abstract geopolitical dispute. It was personal. It affected decisions about land, equipment, hiring, and the future of family businesses that had existed for generations. Some consequences are easy to measure: prices, salaries, imports, exports. But other costs are harder to see. Economic uncertainty creates stress. Businesses delay investments. Employers become cautious. Workers worry about job security. Investors react to headlines. Markets fluctuate, and ordinary people are left wondering what comes next. The trade war introduced a level of unpredictability into an already complex economy. Every new announcement raised questions. Would prices rise again? Would businesses relocate production? Would jobs be created or lost? Would the conflict end soon or continue for years? For many Americans, the greatest challenge wasn't necessarily the immediate financial impact. It was the uncertainty. Humans can adapt to difficult situations, but uncertainty creates anxiety, and anxiety has a cost of its own. Supporters of the trade war argued that short-term pain was necessary for long-term economic goals. Critics argued that ordinary Americans were paying too much of the cost. Years later, economists continue to debate the overall effectiveness of the strategy. But one fact remains difficult to ignore. Trade wars are rarely fought by governments alone. The effects spread through entire societies, through stores, through businesses, through farms, through families, and through millions of everyday decisions made by ordinary people. The U.S.-China trade war may have been fought with tariffs instead of weapons, but its consequences were real, not visible on a battlefield, not measured in military victories, but reflected in higher prices, business uncertainty, market disruptions, and the lives of people who never expected to become part of an international economic conflict. Because sometimes, the most powerful battles are not the ones we see on the news. They're the ones quietly unfolding in shopping carts, kitchen tables, and monthly budgets. The hidden cost of the trade war wasn't paid by nations alone. It was paid by people